In the 1830s, the land we now know as Canada wasn't a democracy. It was more like a private club, run by a tiny, unelected clique known as the Family Compact. They controlled everything: the land, the laws, the money, and they weren't shy about using that power to make themselves rich while ordinary people struggled. They thought they were untouchable. But they got greedy, and they pushed too far. This is the story of how one corrupt group's greed lit the fuse on a rebellion that set Canada on the long road to freedom. Before Canada was a country, it was a bunch of British colonies. The biggest one in English-speaking North America was Upper Canada, which we now call Ontario. But calling it a colony of the people would be a stretch. In the early 19th century, Upper Canada was basically a private piggy bank for a small group of powerful men. They were a tight-knit circle of officials and businessmen who dominated the colony's government, its courts, its church, and its economy so completely they earned a nickname, the Family Compact. This wasn't a family in the literal sense, bound by blood. They were bound by something much stronger: shared greed, absolute loyalty to each other, and a bottomless appetite for power. They were the judges, the bankers, and the bishops, all appointed not by the people, but by a lieutenant governor sent from Britain who was usually part of their club. The whole system was their shield. The colony had an elected assembly, but it was basically for show. Any law the people's representatives passed could be shut down by the Legislative Council, the upper house, which was, you guessed it, stuffed with members of the compact. The people could vote, but their votes were just an illusion of democracy painted over the reality of an oligarchy. The corruption was everywhere, and it was suffocating. In a new colony, the most valuable thing is land, and the Family Compact controlled it all. Ordinary settlers had to clear their land and build on it within 2 years or risk losing it. But friends of the compact, they were gifted huge swaths of land with no strings attached. They'd just sit on these massive, wild properties, which made it impossible for their farming neighbors to build roads or communities. Their control choked the economy, too. The Bank of Upper Canada was the colony's financial heart, and its directors were all core members of the Family Compact. They handed out loans to their friends and squeezed farmers and small business owners. After the financial panic of 1836, when money was tight, the bank went on the attack, suing poor farmers and other debtors and throwing families into poverty just to protect the wealth of the elite. Even religion was a weapon. The compact poured public money and land into the Church of England, while other denominations like the Methodists, who were way more popular with regular folks, were shut out. And justice? That was a fantasy. If you had a problem with a member of the compact, you had to take it to a court run by another member of the compact. When a gang of rich kids connected to the elite destroyed a reformist newspaper's printing press, the trial was a joke. The vandals got a slap on the wrist. For years, the people of Upper Canada petitioned for fairness. For years, they were ignored. The compact believed they were unshakable. They were wrong. Every story of oppression needs a troublemaker, a voice for the voiceless. In Upper Canada, that voice belonged to a fiery, stubborn, Scottish-born journalist named William Lyon Mackenzie. Mackenzie was the exact opposite of the polished men in the Family Compact. He was an agitator who'd come to Canada and was instantly disgusted by the corruption he saw. In 1824, he started a newspaper, the Colonial Advocate, and made it his personal mission to expose the ruling class. Mackenzie's writing wasn't subtle. It was a sledgehammer. He called out the compact by name, publishing blistering articles detailing their crooked land deals and their contempt for the common person. He's the one who gave them the name, Family Compact, and it stuck, perfectly capturing the rotten nature of their power. He became a lightning rod for all the anger simmering in the colony. The Family Compact saw him as a mortal threat. They couldn't beat his arguments, so they tried to silence him. In 1826, a mob of their young loyalist cronies broke into Mackenzie's office, smashed his printing press to pieces, and tossed the parts into Lake Ontario. It was a clear act of political violence, meant to shut him up for good. But it backfired, spectacularly. The public was outraged. Mackenzie sued, and the court case turned him into a martyr for free speech. The attack just made him more famous. His popularity shot him straight into politics. He was elected to the Legislative Assembly, the same body the Compact had made powerless. But from inside the government, Mackenzie kept fighting, digging into the government's books and exposing every dirty deal he could find. The family Compact was furious. They couldn't stand having him there. So, they just threw him out. 5 times, the Assembly voted to expel William Lyon Mackenzie. And 5 times, his voters sent him right back. Each expulsion was a farce, proving that the will of the people meant nothing to the ruling class. The breaking point came in 1836. A new lieutenant governor, Sir Francis Bondhead, showed up promising reform. But it was all a lie. He ruled just as tyrannically as the others, and in the election of 1836, he openly used intimidation and loyalist mobs to crush the reformers. Mackenzie lost his seat. For Mackenzie and his followers, that was it. Years of trying to play by the rules had gotten them nowhere. The game was rigged. Mackenzie became convinced that the whole corrupt system had to be torn down. He started a new, more radical newspaper and began openly talking about an American-style democracy. The time for words was over. He believed the only option left was armed revolution. By the fall of 1837, the air in the Canadas was thick with rebellion. In Lower Canada, modern Quebec, the Patriots were already in open revolt. This was a critical development, because the British had to send all their professional soldiers there, leaving the capital of Upper Canada, Toronto, almost completely undefended. For William Lyon Mackenzie, this was the signal. The plan was set for December 7, 1837. But rebellions rarely stick to a schedule. Mackenzie rallied about 1,000 followers, mostly farmers angry about their debts and inspired by democratic ideals. The plan was bold: march down Yonge Street, grab the city's weapons, capture the lieutenant governor, and declare a new government. They gathered at Montgomery's Tavern, a few miles north of Toronto, armed with old muskets, homemade pikes, and a lot of nerve. Things started to unravel early. On December 5, a few hundred impatient rebels decided to march on the city. On the way, they ran into a loyalist officer, Colonel Robert Moody. When Moody tried to ride through their roadblock to warn Toronto, shots rang out. He fell dead, the first casualty of the rebellion. Panic immediately set in. That night, a tiny loyalist patrol of less than 30 men ambushed the advancing rebel column. In the darkness and confusion, the front rank of rebels fired and then, as they were trained, dropped to the ground to reload. The men behind them, thinking their leaders had all been killed, panicked and ran. The first real fight of the rebellion ended in a confused, terrified retreat. By December 7, the original start date, the government had gotten its act together. Loyalist reinforcements poured into Toronto. Notably, this included black militiamen, who feared that a rebellion inspired by American-style republicanism might threaten their freedom, which was protected under British law. The final showdown took place at Montgomery's Tavern. The Loyalist forces, now over 1,000 strong, marched north. They brought cannons. The rebels didn't. After a brief, hopeless resistance, the Loyalist artillery opened fire, the rebels scattered, and the tavern was burned to the ground. The Upper Canada Rebellion was over almost as soon as it had begun. The aftermath was brutal. 2 of Mackenzie's lieutenants, Samuel Lount and Peter Matthews, were publicly hanged. Mackenzie himself, now a wanted man with a price on his head, made a dramatic escape across the Niagara River into the United States. On the surface, it was an absolute failure. The family compact had won. But the blood spilled that December had planted a seed. If you're finding this dive into Canada's revolutionary past interesting, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about the hidden conflicts that shaped our world. And let us know in the comments, what other historical rebellions do you think deserve a closer look? William Lyon Mackenzie's rebellion may have been crushed, but he wasn't done fighting. After escaping to the United States, he found plenty of American sympathizers eager to help end British rule in North America. This support kicked off the next, even messier chapter of the conflict, the Patriot War. For nearly a year, from late 1837 to late 1838, bands of Canadian rebels and their American allies launched raid after raid across the border into Upper Canada. Mackenzie even occupied an island in the Niagara River and declared the independent Republic of Canada. This provoked the British to cross into American waters and burn the Caroline, a steamboat supplying the rebels, nearly starting a war with the U.S. The most significant and bloody clash was the Battle of the Windmill in November 1838. A few hundred patriots were cornered in a large stone windmill near Prescott. They held out for 4 days against over 1,000 British soldiers and Canadian militia. It was a heroic but futile last stand that ended in a slaughter. The Patriot War ultimately failed, and Mackenzie himself was even arrested in the U.S. for violating neutrality laws. The dream of a Canadian republic was dead. And yet, all this chaos and bloodshed, in its own way, worked. The rebellions in both Upper and Lower Canada sent a massive shockwave to London. The British government, seriously alarmed, knew something had to change. They couldn't just ignore the colonies anymore. In 1838, they sent a political fixer, John Lambton, the Earl of Durham, to figure out what went wrong. Durham, known as Radical Jack for his progressive views, got to the heart of the matter. His official report from 1839 laid out a revolutionary idea: responsible government. It was simple, really, and it was exactly what the reformers had been fighting for all along. It meant that the people running the government should be chosen from the majority party in the elected assembly. In short, the government would finally be accountable to the people, not to a governor or a local clique. The British Parliament acted. They merged Upper and Lower Canada into a single province of Canada in 1841. In this new, united province, reformers from both sides formed a powerful alliance and kept pushing. Finally, in 1848, a full decade after the failed rebellions, they won. The governor granted them the power to form a government that was truly responsible to the elected assembly. The family compact's monopoly on power was broken forever. The days of being ruled by a corrupt, unaccountable elite were over. So, was the rebellion of 1837 a failure? On the battlefield, absolutely. It was disorganized, poorly led, and swiftly crushed. But its long-term impact was monumental. That bloody, desperate uprising forced the British Empire to fundamentally rethink how it governed its colonies, leading directly to the Durham Report and the blueprint for Canadian democracy. The greed of the family compact pushed ordinary people to a point where they felt they had no choice but to take up arms. And in doing so, they unknowingly lit the fire that would burn down their own corrupt world and forge a new nation. The rebels lost the battles, but in the end, they won the war. Their sacrifice paved the way for a cornerstone of Canadian democracy that stands to this day. It was a failure that changed a nation forever. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next one.